Hello. We turn now to our final consideration of Othello. I noted last class that Shakespeare is exploring, among other things, in this play, the nature of memory, as he does in Hamlet, both the failure of memory at crucial moments, but also the burden of painful memories that characters can't forget even though they would like to. Well, stretched on the rack that Iago has created to torture him, Othello is afflicted by the memory of words and images that Iago has implanted in his mind, words like jealousy and cuckold that make Othello feel degraded, humiliated, even subhuman. As he says at one point, a horned man's a monster and a beast, nothing more. And Othello takes no consolation in believing that the fate of all married men, as Iago tells him, is to be cuckolds. There's no consolation in knowing that or believing that he is simply part of a group that will always be betrayed. Similarly, Othello can't dislodge from his mind Iago's description of Cassio, quote, plucking up kisses by the roots from Desdemona's lips and, quote, lying naked together with her in bed, Othello's bed. But Othello is also tortured by memories of the gentle, virtuous Desdemona that he fell in love with, and whom he briefly pities when he thinks Cassio has used and abandoned her. Those memories, too, torture him because that seems an inaccessible time. Now, while Othello, then, is burdened by these various memories, like Hamlet, he is also a victim of his own forgetfulness. Just as Desdemona, in her concern for his headache, forgot where she lost the handkerchief or how, so too, when Othello demands that she present the handkerchief to him so that he can wipe his face, he has forgotten that he knocked it away from her, knocked it out of her hand as she was trying to bind his throbbing head. Now, the fact that they both forget that incident, that they both forget what happened to this napkin, is sadly ironic, because the object, after all, that has been forgotten began as Othello's first, quote, remembrance to Desdemona. That is, it was a token meant to remind Desdemona of his love for her always. Just as Othello has forgotten knocking the handkerchief onto the street, he has also forgotten the man that he once was. Desdemona is surely right when she says, "My lord is not my lord." Othello is not the man she knew and fell in love with. Yet, Desdemona continues to love him unconditionally, hoping to bring him back to the man he was. She loves him even after, as we saw last time, he strikes her in the street. Desdemona says merely in response, "I have not deserved this." But this assault in public horrifies, among others, the Venetian emissary Ludovico, who says, "This would not be believed in Venice." That is, this is something that a civilized man doesn't do to his wife or any woman. Well, Desdemona is agonized and baffled at Othello's aggression, and she weeps after he strikes her. But Othello mocks her tears as more role-playing, turning and turning, he says, from one pose to another, all, he believes, in a performance of deception. Well, Desdemona can't understand what he means when he accuses her here of painted passion, that is, of only pretending to feel passionate love for him when in fact it was not genuine. Desdemona's confusion, of course, has much to do with her youth and inexperience in love. She has no concept of jealousy because she herself has never experienced jealousy, and she tells Emilia that she can't believe that Othello could ever feel such a vile emotion. And in this respect, we're reminded that early in the play, Othello too seemed incapable of believing that other people were deceitful because he is so honest himself. Both Othello and Desdemona, then, are victimized at different points in the play by their unfamiliarity with darker, malignant sides of human nature. The difference is that Othello will reveal evils in himself that he had refused earlier to see in others, while Desdemona never does see them in others, and indeed seems not to possess them in herself. Yet, because both Desdemona and Othello are so trusting, they both fail to read signals that could have saved them. For example, even after Othello pushed the handkerchief away and told Desdemona, "Your napkin is too little." When they next meet, Desdemona immediately and unfortunately reminds him of his promise to speak to Cassio. And even when she meets him with Lodovico, she mentions, quote, "the love I bear to Cassio," never suspecting that Othello might be jealous of Cassio, or that Othello might not be in a mood to receive this kind of reminder. Well, hearing this reminder, the second one, Othello bellows, "Fire and brimstone," not understanding that Desdemona, when she speaks of the love she bears to Cassio, is referring to a friendly love for him that originated because of Cassio's support of her relationship with Othello. Othello fails to understand her meaning here, but more tragically, he fails to read Iago's sinister intentions throughout the play and to understand Iago's fabrication of evidence. Even when Othello has come to distrust everyone else, he believes in Iago. Now, since their arrival in Cyprus earlier that day, late in Act 4, Cassio, Othello, and Desdemona have had 4 meetings, all of them in public. In the first meeting, you'll remember, she urged Othello to talk to Cassio and restore his commission. In the second, she had tried to bind his head with the handkerchief, and he pushed it away. In the third meeting, Othello challenged her to produce the missing handkerchief and told her the strange story of its pagan origins. And as we saw at the end of last class, in the fourth meeting, he strikes her and calls her devil. Now, this brings us to the fifth encounter between the two, and an even more disturbing one. Unlike the previous 4, which all take place in the street with other characters present, this one takes place indoors in the castle. Othello tells Emilia to leave him alone with Desdemona and to shut the door, making Desdemona all the more vulnerable in the face of Othello's escalating rage and mental derangement. Now he accuses her openly of deceit and infidelity. Desdemona is confused. "Upon my knee, what doth your speech import?" she asks. "I understand a fury in your words, but not the words." To which Othello replies, "Why, what art thou?" "Your wife, my lord, and true and loyal wife." Othello then says, "Come, swear it, damn thyself, lest being like one of heaven, the devils themselves should fear to seize thee. Therefore be double damned. Swear thou art honest." "Heaven doth truly know it." To which Othello says, "Heaven truly knows thou art false as hell." "To whom, my lord? With whom? How am I false?" "Oh, Desdemona, away, away, away." He refuses to believe anything she says. Even though Desdemona tells Othello that she swears, his true and loyal wife, he is so disbelieving at this time that he accuses her of being both an adulteress and a liar. In both respects, she is false as hell. This is what he means when he says she is doubly damned. Now, you might note that Othello invokes hell and the devil at times to condemn others, but at other times he invokes the devil as his own inspiration, which I think reflects a kind of instability and confusion in his thoughts in general. Well, Othello goes on to hurl more abuse at his wife, calling her, quote, "a cunning whore of Venice," calling her a strumpet, another name for a prostitute, and finally saying, "Thou weed, I would thou hadst never been born." He blames Desdemona for destroying his reputation in the eyes of the world, and more important, he accuses her of robbing him of his inner sense of himself. He says, "To make me the fixed figure for the time of scorn to point his slow and moving figure at. Yet I could bear that too. Well, very well. But there, where I have garnered up my heart, where either I must live or bear no life, the fountain from which my current runs or else dries up, to be discarded thence, or keep it as a cistern for foul toads to not engender in, turn thy complexion there. I should make very forges of my cheeks that would do cinders burn up modesty. But did I but speak thy deeds. If I gave a full account of what you've done, it would burn me up with shame. Now, note, Othello's talking about what Desdemona, he believes, has done to his identity here. Now, his identity, as we've seen, is founded partly on how others see him, as is Cassio's, but also on an inner sense of being. Unlike Iago, whose sense of inner self derives from the exercise of will and the pleasure of evil, what Othello calls, quote, the fountain from which my current runs, his sense of inner self, is rooted in a feeling of inner dignity and shared love with Desdemona. He tells Desdemona here that her betrayal of him has not only made him an object of derision, he imagines, in the eyes of others, that he could even bear, but more important, it has dried up the sense of inner self, the wellspring of selfhood in his heart, where the current of his being flows. Well, when Othello storms out, Desdemona tells Emilia that she has, quote, no husband. She means, of course, that she doesn't recognize Othello as the man she married. But she still loves him, and she still wants to reclaim him, wants to return Othello to the man he was just hours earlier. Because remember, all of this transformation has occurred in a single day. And in an attempt then to do this, to bring him back to what he has been, she asks Emilia to do something. She says, prithee tonight, lay on my bed my wedding sheets. Remember. The key word here is remember, which has a double meaning. Desdemona uses it in a twofold sense. She is urging Emilia to remember to put the wedding sheets on her bed, but also she hopes that these sheets themselves and the memory of lovemaking attached to those sheets will call Othello back to himself, will make him remember the love that they share. These sheets, which a bride would, after all, bring to her marriage, are the symbolic counterpart of the handkerchief that Othello gave Desdemona. Think of it. Both are fabrics with memories attached to them, and both are intended as expressions of romantic love. But both are also associated with death. The strawberry napkin, despite its cheerful silk design, was, according to Othello at least, soaked in a fluid distilled from the mummified hearts of virgins. And the sheets will soon become linked with death as well, Desdemona's death. But even before Othello smothers her on these sheets, which he thinks she has profaned, Desdemona, almost like Cassandra, anticipates her own demise. When Othello orders her to go to bed, she obeys and tells Emilia that even when Othello frowns, quote, my love doth so approve him. But a moment later, she has a premonition, which she shares with Emilia. She says, if I do die before thee, prithee shroud me in one of these same sheets. And then she has a recollection. When Emilia says, oh, come on, you're talking. No. Desdemona says, my mother had a maid called Barbary. She was in love, and he she loved proved mad and did forsake her. She had a song of willow, an old thing 'twas, but it expressed her fortune, and she died singing it. That song tonight will not go from my mind. She's haunted by this memory of the song that her mother's maid sang. And this is, after all, the first reference to Desdemona's mother, who seems to have died at some point fairly early in her life. Now, you'll note here that Othello's cruelty and emotional abandonment makes Desdemona recall this from her childhood, when her mother had a black Barbary maid who sang a lament about a weeping willow because the man that this maid loved went insane and abandoned her, as Othello, in his derangement, is in the process of abandoning and then destroying Desdemona. Now, the Barbary maid, Desdemona recalls, died singing this lament, and ironically, in her own suffering, Desdemona identifies with this dark-skinned woman from Othello's own native culture. As an expression of Desdemona's enduring love for Othello, we should note again that this love, however, isn't just compassionate, but it is also erotic. She wants Othello to see the bridal sheets where they just consummated their marriage a day or two earlier in Venice, in the hope of renewing Othello's passionate love for her. Now, some have even suggested that these wedding sheets, these bridal sheets, might bear the bloodstains from Desdemona's loss of virginity. And as such, this would be both partly a cherished reminder of their lovemaking, but also at the same time, it would be a grim foreshadowing of her death on these same sheets, though, as we'll see, Othello refuses to shed her blood when he kills her. Now, at a point in the play when Othello has repudiated his own acquired Christianity and embraced supernatural magic in his past, it's notable that as he becomes, if you will, more paganized, Desdemona seems increasingly framed as a Christ figure. She is an innocent victim who loves and forgives the man who is injuring her, and forgives others who have contributed to her undoing as well. When Emilia says that the man who has corrupted Othello's mind should have his bones, quote, gnawed in hell, Desdemona replies, quote, if there be any such, have pardon on him, not realizing, ironically, that as she says that, Iago is standing next to her, who is the instigator of Othello's deranged jealousy and her own destruction. Desdemona also echoes Christ when she tells Iago and Emilia that she will love Othello no matter what he does to her, love him even unto death. As she puts it eloquently, what shall I do to win my lord again, Iago? Good friend, go to him, for by this light of heaven I know not how I lost him. Here I kneel. I ere my will did trespass against his love. Though he do shake me off to beggarly divorcement, love him dearly I will. Comfort forswear me. Unkindness may do much, and his unkindness may defeat my life, but it will never taint my love. Desdemona's naive trust here in Iago, as one who will understand this declaration of unconditional love and will help her, is an ironic echo of Othello's own trust in Iago. Like Othello and Cassio, Desdemona too thinks that Iago, the consummate confidence man, is supporting her and working on her behalf. None of them realize he's subverting them all. It's a hallmark of Iago's sinister intelligence in this elaborate web he's created that he has convinced all three of his victims of his honesty and his sympathy for them, even as he is destroying the three by turning them against each other. Iago is completely unmoved by Desdemona's declaration of unconditional love for Othello, because Iago is as incapable of compassion as he is incapable of and immune to guilt. As we've seen, Iago commits gratuitous cruelties just because he can, and because the suffering that they produce in others gratifies him. Even little things. And this includes, for example, such things as cheating Roderigo out of the jewels that he was supposed to give Desdemona as a bribe on Roderigo's behalf. Iago, of course, claims that he gave Desdemona the jewels and that she simply didn't respond. But in fact, that's a lie. He's kept them, as he has with all of Roderigo's money, for himself. He enjoys humiliating this gullible man. When Roderigo, in fact, that's for him, I think, the sense of power is more important than the wealth. When Roderigo expresses his frustration at Iago's failure to carry through with the promise that he would give Desdemona these jewels and that would pave the way for Roderigo's suit and pursuit of her, Iago listens and then easily brings Roderigo back into line through flattery, more false promises, more lies. And he does so because he enjoys it, but also because he needs, as he has throughout, to use Roderigo as an instrument in one final step in his scheme. What he says to Roderigo will amount to, quote, knocking out Cassio's brains, okay? Eliminating him. Now, Iago tells Roderigo that if his rival Cassio is dead, if he kills him, then Othello will have to stay in Cyprus and remain as commander rather than returning to Venice as he had been ordered. And, of course, Desdemona, as Othello's wife, will have to stay in Cyprus with him, which will give Roderigo an opportunity to pursue her and ultimately, Iago promises, win her. Well, Roderigo was, of course, before this, ready to give up. He said, if she will return me my jewels, I will give over my suit. I've had enough of this. But, of course, Iago talks him out of it. Note, again, the image of jewels here and how it evolves in the play in connection to Desdemona. The wealthy Roderigo wants to buy her love with gems and imagines that he can. But remember that Desdemona has been devalued as a worthless jewel herself by both her father and Othello, both of whom feel that she has betrayed their trust. Betrayed the father's trust by marrying Othello, betrayed Othello's trust, he believes, by having an affair with Cassio. Actually, Desdemona is so far from being capable of betraying Othello that she can't believe any woman would ever cheat on her husband for all the world, in the same way she can't believe that anybody would ever really be jealous. In fact, Desdemona is incredulous when Emilia tells her that she, Emilia, wouldn't hesitate to commit, quote, the small vice of adultery under certain circumstances. Desdemona said, I've heard to so these men. Oh, Emilia says, well, yes, men do sometimes cheat on their wives. And Desdemona says, wouldst thou do such a deed for all the world thyself? To which Emilia says, why, would not you? No, by this heavenly light. To which Emilia says, nor I neither by this heavenly light. I might do it well in the dark, though. Desdemona says, wouldst thou do such a deed for all the world? She still can't believe it. To which Emilia replies, the world's a huge thing. It is a great price for a small vice. Who would not make her husband a cuckold to make him a monarch? I should venture purgatory for it. Yeah, I would suffer for my sins afterward. I might do it under certain circumstances. Emilia suggests that she would sleep with another man if by doing so she could promote her husband Iago, though she later makes it clear that despite Iago's suspicions, she has not had an affair with Othello to try to promote him. Still, we see again that Emilia is a complex woman who both resents Iago's abusive behavior toward her, yet she would like to repair her marriage by supporting Iago in any way she can, and would even paradoxically betray him if it could somehow lead to his promotion in the world. But it soon becomes clear that Emilia would also commit adultery under certain circumstances for another reason, not to promote her husband, to satisfy herself. She is, we realize, sexually frustrated. Iago, by his own admission, has failed to perform his duty in bed as her husband. He imagines that she's oversexed and demanding. Emilia wrongly imagines, however, that this failure to satisfy her on Iago's part is due to the fact that he is cheating on her with another woman and has nothing left for her. She doesn't realize that her husband is either impotent and or homosexual. Thus, she says to Desdemona, but I do think it is their husband's fault if wives do fall, cheat. Say that they slack their duties and pour our treasures into foreign laps, or else break out in peevish jealousies, throwing restraint upon us, or say they strike us. Let husbands know their wives have sense like them. They see and smell and have their palates both for sweet and sour as husbands have. And have not we affections, desires for sport and frailty as men have? Then let them use us well. Else let them know the ills we do, their ills instruct us so. Now, Emilia is protesting as a neglected and abused wife. And I hope her words might have reminded you a bit of what Medea says in her assault, not just against her husband's inattention, but against patriarchy. Emilia resents that husbands feel free to cheat on their wives, pouring what she calls treasures into foreign laps, okay? What ought to be given sexually to them, they're giving to other women. Note again the language of gems here. And this squandering of what ought to be the treasures a wife receives from her husband go not to their spouses, but to other women. She tells Desdemona that men don't recognize that women also have passionate needs. She describes it in the language of taste. We like the sweet, we like the sour, we like variety, and that we are as capable of straying, therefore, in order to get what we desire erotically as you men are. So, she concludes, if husbands want faithful wives, they must be sexually faithful themselves, or we will learn from what you do and copy you in our own infidelities. Okay, we turn now to Act 5. And as we do so, I want to call your attention to two things from the start. First, after watching Iago's plan slowly unfold heretofore, step by step, strand by strand in the web, now the action in this final act of the play is swift and direct and unrelenting. Shakespeare doesn't also in this offer us any comic interlude late in the play, as he does in many of the other great comedies. There are no fools, as in Lear, no drunken gatekeepers, as in Macbeth, no whimsical gravediggers, as in Hamlet. And the second thing I want to point out from the beginning is that after a tumultuous day in Cyprus, the entire action of Act 5 takes place at night, as it has taken place at night in Venice in Act 1 and toward the end of Act 4. The darkness, of course, makes the sense of urgency we feel and dread even stronger now. But there's also not just a sense of urgency on the part of the reader or viewer, but there's also a sense of urgency in Othello and Iago, as if they know that the end, the resolution, is nearing. Early in Act 5, Iago says, "This is the night that either makes me or fordoes me quite." That is, either my elaborate plan will succeed now, tonight, in destroying Othello and Desdemona and Cassio, or I will be exposed. Now, just as we've seen Shakespeare juxtapose whiteness and blackness among the play's many antinomies, so too he plays off night and day throughout the tragedy. The nighttime setting now is certainly appropriate for the multiple deaths that occur in Act 5, but nighttime is also important because the darkness allows Iago to hide from view for much of the time, just as he hid from view at crucial moments in Venice in Act 1, when, hidden in the shadows, you recall, he screamed up to Brabantio that his white ewe was being tupped by an old black ram. Now, we've seen Iago distort Othello's sense of time and space in the daylight, but night is Iago's real natural element, because nighttime makes perception even more difficult, and also because darkness has long been associated with deception and evil. Now, we see from this start that Iago is at home in the night as the way no other character is. Even as he urges Roderigo to murder Cassio, he is himself secretly telling himself that both Cassio and Roderigo are going to have to die if he wants to be sure that they don't incriminate him by speaking to one another or anyone else. So, as directed, Roderigo tries to kill Cassio. He strikes Cassio, but he fails to kill him because of Cassio's chain mail armor, which seems to be underneath his outer garments, and that Roderigo did not know, nor did Iago for that matter, that he was wearing. So, seeing this, Iago then leaps out of the shadows, out of the darkness, and stabs both men. He kills the poor gullible Roderigo in the process, but he only wounds Cassio as he strikes at him from behind. Now, the fact that Cassio survives both Roderigo's assault and Iago's suggests, of course, the first failure on Iago's part in this evolving scheme of destruction. His first failure, really, since Act 1, when he tried and failed to have Othello arrested by rousing Brabantio and getting him to charge Othello with witchcraft for eloping with Desdemona. Now, by this point, Iago has already humiliated and discredited Cassio, as we've seen, getting him into a drunken brawl. Therefore, Iago avenged the promotion that he thinks he should have received. But that was really almost a pretext for a deeper desire to destroy. As I've noted, Iago hates Cassio for other reasons as well, much as he hates Othello for other reasons than the fact that Othello passed him over. And Iago reminds himself of this deeper hatred for Cassio in order to stoke his urge to destroy him. Now, just as earlier he had stoked his hatred of Cassio by nurturing a very dubious suspicion that Cassio, the suave ladies' man, had slept with his own sex-starved wife, Emilia. Here's what Iago tells himself just before leaping out of the darkness and stabbing Cassio in order to urge himself on. It says, "If Cassio do remain, he hath a daily beauty in his life that makes me ugly, and besides, the more may unfold me to him, and there stand I in much peril. No, he must die." Here he comes. Okay, now Cassio must die to ensure that he doesn't discover Iago's double dealing and tell Othello. But he must also die, Iago suggests, because Iago feels that Cassio makes him look bad. Now we must wonder, is this actually a moment of self-hatred on Iago's part? I don't think so. Iago is an egotist who loves himself and only himself. And you'll recall that Iago told Roderigo in Act 1, quote, "I never knew a man that knew how to love himself," basically except me. In his first soliloquy, Iago made it clear that he relishes the self-gratifying nefariousness and cynicism that is his nature. So what Iago speaks of here, I think, isn't self-hatred when he says he hath a daily beauty in his life that makes me ugly. No, what he's referring to here, I think, again, is jealousy, which, as we've seen, Iago is prone to, but which, unlike Othello, Iago is able to conceal this jealousy. Well, even after Cassio was demoted, Iago is still envious of this handsome younger man because he knows that other people regard Cassio's courtly manners and manly form and physical beauty as alluring, and that by comparison he thinks they must see me as ugly. Not that he sees himself that way, but he thinks other people do. Now, that makes him jealous. Even though Iago's sense of identity lies within himself, as we have seen, he still resents the idea that by comparison others see me as somehow less attractive, less worthy than Cassio. Now, at the same time, we've already noted that Iago is secretly drawn to Cassio's physical beauty himself, as revealed in the homoerotic fantasy that he disclosed to Othello of sleeping in Cassio's room and feeling Cassio's supposed embraces and kisses that were meant for Desdemona. Iago's jealous hatred of Cassio's handsome appearance, I think, explains why he wounds Cassio when he jumps out in the leg. It's not just that Iago knows that Cassio is wearing armor beneath his clothing that will protect him if he tries to stab him in the body. It's partly that, but Iago hopes that if his sword thrust into the legs doesn't kill Cassio by blood loss, it will at least disfigure this Adonis, this handsome fellow, that it will ruin his youthful beauty and thereby avenge him on his sense of frustration and rage that this man charms so many men and women with his looks. Now, he does, in some way, succeed in maiming him. As Cassio collapses after this strike, Cassio says, "I am maimed forever. I am spoiled. My leg is cut in two." It's exactly what Iago wants. But of course, Cassio says this, not realizing who it was that snuck up behind him and struck him in the leg, not realizing that it was Iago. When Iago returns to the scene a moment later, he cherishes the idea that he has indeed maimed this beautiful man and says to Cassio, who mangled you? Again, laying emphasis on the sense of a kind of physical impairment that he's inflicted. Well, when Othello walks by in the darkness a moment later, he hears Cassio crying out in agony. And Othello believes that Iago is responsible for this attack, as he is, but Othello imagines that Iago has attacked Cassio to avenge him, Othello, as his true friend. So Othello praises what he calls Iago's, quote, noble sense of thy friend's wrong. Thank you. Othello is mistaken, of course, about the motives here and about the entire context, but he's mistaken also about something else. He incorrectly assumes at this moment that Cassio is about to die. Actually, Cassio survives. But once again, Othello misreads the situation that Iago has created, just as he has throughout the entire day. Now, Iago also dispatches in this attack in the darkness the wounded Rodrigo before he can blurt out the truth. Okay, first he wounds him and then puts an end to him. And in killing him, Iago pretends that he is avenging the wounded Cassio. So within the spontaneous convolutions of Iago's ingenious design, both Cassio and Othello imagine that Iago has defended them against an enemy. Well, when other Venetians arrive in the street with Bianca, Iago plausibly suggests that Rodrigo and Cassio injured each other in a dispute over her, over Bianca, over the prostitute. And of course, everyone agrees with this, and they all hold the courtesan as responsible for this fight because they believe, as Iago has told them, the fight arose when Bianca left Rodrigo and went to handsome Cassio, as all women want to do. Quote, this dispute and bloodshed, Iago says sententiously, is the fruits of whoring. Let's blame it on the courtesan. It's always convenient to blame the woman. Now, we shift now in scene from this violent street encounter indoors again, inside the castle, to Desdemona's bedchamber. The enclosed space here, as in the previous meeting of Desdemona and Othello, is once again ominous because it is in private now and because there is no escape. We sense even more than we did in the previous encounter Desdemona's entrapment and vulnerability. If Othello could strike her out in the open, what will he do now, again behind closed doors? Well, when Othello enters Desdemona's bedroom, he sees that Emilia has, as requested, dressed the bed in their wedding sheets. Othello is in a state of agonizing mental turmoil, and this inner conflict gives rise to his greatest soliloquy as he enters the dark bedroom. Even though Othello has wanted, you'll recall, in the near past, to tear his wife to pieces, to chop her to messes, he now approaches the act of killing Desdemona with some reluctance. In order to follow through, he tries to convince himself that what he's about to undertake isn't murder. Before, murder would have been just great. But no, now it's not a murder, but rather a form of justice. A word you remember that he'd used earlier when Iago suggested that he strangle her in her bed. Othello had said, I like the justice in it. Now he goes back to this idea of justice in order to persuade himself to follow through. It is the cause, my soul. Let me not name it to you, you chaste stars. It is the cause. Yet I'll not shed her blood, nor scar that whiter skin of hers than snow, and smooth as alabaster. Yet she must die, else she'll betray more men. Let's stop there in the soliloquy for a moment. The repetition at the outset, the intoning of the cause, the cause, the cause. This suggests, of course, that Othello is trying to talk himself into ending Desdemona's life in order to fulfill the solemn vow that he made to Iago, to himself, and to hell that he would do so. But now, unlike before, he is no longer consumed by a kind of homicidal madness. Even the rhythms of his speech suggest that he is now saner, more reflective, more rational. And as a result, Othello is ambivalent at this moment. So ambivalent that he needs to push himself beyond his moral misgivings and beyond the residue of love he still feels for Desdemona when he looks at her beauty. So when Othello then repeats to himself and speaks of the cause in urging himself to carry out the killing, the revenge, that word cause, repeated 3 times, has 3 different meanings. First, he means the cause in the sense of legal justice. Desdemona must be punished for what Othello believes is her crime of adultery. Second, Othello refers to cause as his own personal cause, the intolerable betrayal that she inflicted, that she committed against him so soon after their marriage. So the register then is both legal and personal in the first 2 references to cause. He wants to make Desdemona pay for her betrayal in the place she committed it, when she invited Cassio to the bed that she and Othello share. But Othello and Desdemona are preoccupied, both of them, with this spousal bed, but in different ways. For Othello, it is the site of the imagined betrayal, and for Desdemona, that bed is the site where she wants to reclaim Othello's love and trust by using the wedding sheets to remind him of their love. But that third reference to cause suggests another meaning, which he makes clear. The cause now that he alludes to is that he's taking up the cause of men in general in the name of justice, of men who have been victimized by their unfaithful wives. Thus he says Desdemona must die, or, quote, she'll betray other men. Thus he later refers to killing her as a sacrifice, as if he were doing it primarily not for himself but on behalf of other men, to protect them from Desdemona, and in a certain sense to avenge them for the indiscretions of their own wives. Now obviously, if he needs to justify it this way, in rather complex repetitions, there's something in Othello working against his drive to kill and necessitating this rationalization process. Othello reveals, I think, what it is in the next part of the soliloquy, when, looking down at Desdemona, he says, "Put out the light, and then put out the light. If I quench thee, thou flaming minister, I can again thy former light restore, should I repent me. But once put out thy light, thou cunningest pattern of excelling nature, I know not where is the Promethean heat that can thy light relume. When I have plucked thy rose, I cannot give it vital growth again. It needs must wither. I'll smell thee on the tree." He kisses her. "O balmy breath that dost almost persuade justice to break her sword. One more, be thus when thou art dead, and I will kill thee and love thee after. One more, and that's the last." He can scarcely hold him back from continuing to kiss her. Now, you'll note here that he is, as he enters this darkened bedroom, carrying a taper, holding it as he stands over his sleeping wife and watches Desdemona. He plans, he says, to put out the light. It's a double entendre. He means that he will snuff out the light of the candle that he's holding, and then, in that darkness, he will snuff out Desdemona's life, the light of her life. But why does he hesitate here? Why does he need to convince himself that executing her wouldn't be murder, but rather justice? Well, I think there are several reasons. First, Othello reflects on the finality of death in this soliloquy. He notes that the fire that the Greek god Prometheus gave to man could be relit, but the light of a human life can't be restored. Murder is final. Or, to use his other metaphor, once you pluck a rose, you can't put it back on the bush. You can relight the taper, but you can't relight Desdemona's life. There's no reversing it. Now, as a soldier, Othello has certainly killed other men in combat, but this is the woman he loved. This is his wife. The second reason he hesitates is because, as I hinted, part of Othello still loves Desdemona, even as he also hates her. As he looks down on her slumbering body, he's so intoxicated by her beauty. He refers to her as a pattern of excelling nature, even if it's a cunning one. He's so moved by that he's afraid he won't be able to follow through, as he had anticipated earlier in talking to Iago. Her beauty moves him so much that he is tempted to break what he now calls the sword of justice and let her live. He can't bear the thought of marring her beauty by shedding her blood, or even of strangling her, which would leave a mark on her alabaster skin. And note again the emphasis on her whiteness. There's no question that part of his attraction to her physically is that she is so beautiful and so white. As he kisses her, he feels the warmth of her balmy breath as she's sleeping, and he kisses her twice and has to hold back from kissing her again. So moved is he. So much is he forced to recognize the power of his attraction to her and the residue of his love for her as he looks at her. Finally, though, another reason why he hesitates is because he foresees that when she is dead, that he will love her even more. In some ways, love her even more because she won't be alive to betray him. But he knows that he will also be filled with remorse for what he is about to do, as indeed he is almost immediately after he kills her. But even before, he now hesitates because he says, "I will kill thee and love thee after." He's right. Finally, I think, Othello delays the strangulation, pauses, hesitates, because he doesn't want Desdemona's soul to go to hell for her sin, a mortal sin, that would be on her soul if he killed her while she slept unconfessed. No, he says he must therefore awaken her and allow her to confess her sins before she dies. When he does, he says that if you bethink yourself of any crime unreconciled as yet to heaven and grace, solicit for it straight. Desdemona says, "Well, alack, my lord, what do you mean by that?" To which Othello says, "Well, do it and be brief. I will walk by. I would not kill thy unprepared spirit. No heavens forfend. I would not kill thy soul." Now, Othello believes that if she dies without confessing her mortal sin of adultery, Desdemona will go to hell, and he doesn't want that to happen. Now, I hope you were reminded of something. Hamlet held off killing Claudius in a soliloquy for the opposite reason. He thought killing Claudius while Claudius appeared to be praying would send Claudius's soul to heaven when he wants to send it to hell. In this case, Othello doesn't want to go send her soul to hell and imagines then that she must confess if she is to be saved from that. He doesn't want to kill her soul. Now, you might be surprised here by Othello's concern for Desdemona's soul, because after all, he seems to have cast off Christianity himself and submerged himself more and more in the atavism of his pagan past and its dark magic. But Othello knows that Desdemona is a Christian, and as such, he is concerned for her soul in the afterlife. Again, he's thinking more clearly, more rationally here than he has for the last two acts. Well, as Othello stands gripped by the indecision that I've described, Desdemona feels his presence and wakes up. He doesn't even have to wake her. His presence alone seems to do it. And Desdemona immediately notices strange contortions in Othello's features, playing and visible in the light of the candle that he's carrying. She says, "Your eyes roll so, and you gnaw at your nether lip." These are signs clearly of a kind of deep conflicted anxiety. They're not signs, I think, of Othello's earlier madness, but rather expressions of the agitation of that inner conflict in which he wants and believes he needs to execute her, and yet finds, for the reasons I've noted, that he cannot yet bring himself to it, that part of him would like to spare her. When Othello orders Desdemona to confess in the passage I just read, she tells him that she can't confess a sin that she didn't commit. she wasn't unfaithful to him. Well, thinking that this is another falsehood, Othello's sympathy for her that had revived as he watched her sleeping now vanishes, and his murderous aggression revives. Desdemona says, I never did offend you in my life, never loved Cassio, but with such general warranty of heaven as I might love, I never gave him token. I never gave him any reason to think that I was in love with him. To which Othello now says, by heaven, I saw my handkerchief in his hand. O perjured woman, thou dost stone my heart and makes me call what I intend to do a murder, which I thought a sacrifice. Yes, he's so now angry that he'll go back to the idea of just murdering her out of jealous rage after having found that he could not do that and need to convince himself that it was justice. Now he's back to that. Well, once Othello's heart turns to stone, as he puts it, all is lost. He rejects Desdemona's pleas of innocence, and he rejects her plea to let her live for even one more day. Quote, kill me tomorrow, she says, let me live tonight. And finally, he even rejects her plea to let her live for just, quote, half an hour. Now that line echoes Othello's remark all the way back in Act 1, when he said, we have but an hour of love to consummate their marriage, their elopement, before they had to depart for Cyprus. Now, the references to time here also remind us that Othello is unable to live in doubt or hesitation because he's still on that rack of dilatory time that Iago has created for him. As I've noted, Iago has so distorted Othello's sense of temporal experience that the idea of half an hour, letting her live for another half an hour, would seem unbearable. That half an hour might seem like a day to a man in this state of conflicted anxiety and horror and urgency and pain. Also, Othello is afraid that if, in the course of half an hour, he continued to be with Desdemona, to look at Desdemona, that attraction to her and the memory of the love they shared as he gazes at her alabaster skin, that might lead him to give up his cause, might weaken his resolve. And so, declaring, quote, there is no pause, no more pause, he smothers her. Now, although Othello had agreed, you'll remember, to Iago's suggestion that he strangle Desdemona with his bare hands, because it would be the most painful, Iago knows. Instead, he suffocates Desdemona using what is likely a pillow. Now, it is, however, no less painful for her. But this way, at least, Othello doesn't have to see Desdemona's face as she dies, as he would if he was strangling her with his own hands. He wants to preserve, as he said, the pale beauty of her beautiful face that he loved, even as he is snuffing out her life. And this way, he doesn't mar her face, but also doesn't have to see that face as he is extinguishing the light from it. And as he is smothering her, he delivers his final soliloquy. Othello says, what noise this? Not dead? Not yet quite dead? I that am cruel am yet merciful. I would not have thee linger in thy pain. So. Sound from the other room. Emilia says, what lord? Oh, my lord, my lord. Who's there? Emilia says, oh, good lord, I would speak a word with you. To which Othello then says, yes, speaking to himself, 'tis Emilia. By and by, she's dead. 'Tis like she comes to speak of Cassio's death. The noise was nigh. Ha! No more moving. Still as the grave. Shall she come in? 'Twert good. I think. No, she stirs again. No. What's best to do? If she come in, she'll speak to my wife. My wife. My wife. What wife? I have no wife. Oh, insupportable, oh, heavy hour. Methinks it should now be a huge eclipse of sun and moon, and that the affrighted globe did yawn at the alteration. Okay. Unlike Iago, Othello is not a sadist. Even as he is executing Desdemona, he doesn't want to see her suffer, and he doesn't want to prolong her pain. And yet, when he hears the knock at the door and stops for a moment, he is inadvertently prolonging her pain. When he hears Emilia calling from the next room, he's thrown into a panic. It's not so much that Emilia will see what he's doing. And he's afraid of that because, after all, when she comes in, he readily confesses that he killed his wife. Rather, it's more a kind of moral panic at this moment, because Othello, even as he's smothering Desdemona, is hoping that on the one hand she will die quickly, and on the other that she will not die at all, that she's still alive. Thus he says, I think she stirs again. He wants her dead, quote, still as the grave, but another part of him can't bear that and is moved by the fact that indeed there's still life within her. Well, no sooner does he convince himself, however, that she is a corpse than he's stricken with a profound sense of loss and grief, thus imagining that he has now snuffed out the light on his second try. He says that I have no wife, that I can't believe it, my wife is gone. He tells himself that in the absence of Desdemona in the world, there ought to be an eclipse of the sun and moon to mark this moment that has taken so much from him. It's as if Desdemona's death that he's just inflicted has extinguished the light from his own life. We go back to put out the light, put out the light. He puts out the taper, he puts out the light of her life, and now he feels as if there ought to be a general eclipse of all light, a removal of all light, because the light of his own life has now disappeared as well. The loss is totalizing for Othello. As if the sun had disappeared, the thought that he now has no wife is insupportable, and yet he knew he would feel this way. He predicted he would feel this way, that he would love her and that he would miss her and he would grieve for her, and he does. But just as Othello was mistaken when he thought Cassio was dead in the street, so too he is mistaken here. He doesn't realize that there is one last flicker of life left in Desdemona. She speaks her final words as Emilia enters, just enough to declare her innocence, but also to exonerate Othello, forgive him, and declare her enduring and eternal love for him. Desdemona says, a guiltless death I die. And then Emilia says, who hath done this deed? To which Desdemona says, nobody. I myself, farewell. Commend me to my kind lord. Oh, farewell. She dies. Now, we've seen that Shakespeare has already evoked Desdemona as Christ-like, and her dying words echo Christ's final words on the cross, that word commend. On the cross, Christ's final words are, into your hands, Father, I commend my spirit. Her final words are, commend me to my kind Lord. Desdemona means by this, remember me to Othello. That is, make Othello recall the fact that even as I die, I love him. Now, as with the wedding sheets, Desdemona, even in her last gasp of breath, wants to bring Othello back to himself through memory. Even after she's dead, she hopes he'll remember the love they shared. Like Christ on the cross, Desdemona is an innocent sacrifice here, one who willingly takes on the guilt of her killer when she says, I myself am responsible, even though she did nothing to provoke her death, and admits that she is guiltless herself. I didn't commit a crime, but I will take on the guilt of my killer. Hearing Desdemona say this does not, however, make Othello feel less guilty. Rather, his guilt has compelled him to justify himself in the past, and now to justify himself to Emilia. He says, I proceeded upon just grounds to this extremity. He says this as soon as Emilia enters. Well, consider Emilia's crucial role here. She is present at Desdemona's death, and she hears this conversation with Othello, explaining that he feels he was justified by Desdemona's infidelity. Now, both her presence at the death and her conversation with Othello here are not things that Iago calculated in his scheme. But these things will, of course, lead to Iago's exposure, but only after he has destroyed Othello and Desdemona. Indeed, Desdemona is already gone. When Othello tells Emilia that Iago led him on to this discovery, Emilia excoriates herself for willingly blinding herself to her husband's evil. She says now, in a fit of unspeakable grief, "Villainy, villainy, villainy, I think upon it. I think I smelled it. Oh, villainy, I thought so then. I kill myself for grief. Oh, villainy, villainy, villainy. Good gentlemen, let me have leave to speak. 'Tis proper I obey my husband, but not now. Perchance, Iago, I'll ne'er go home with you again." Okay, now you'll note that Othello immediately defends Iago by insisting that he saw actual evidence that confirmed Iago's claims about Desdemona giving the handkerchief to Cassio in a form of betrayal that reflected that they were sleeping together. Othello insists Cassio confessed it, and she did gratify his amorous works with the recognizance and pledge of love which I first gave her, the napkin. I saw it in his hand. It was a handkerchief, an antique token my father gave my mother. Okay, now, wait a minute, you might say. My father gave my mother. Othello's account of the origin of the handkerchief here contradicts his earlier version in an important way. You remember that before, he said that a fortune teller gave the handkerchief to his mother to keep in order to ensure that her husband, Othello's father, remained faithful. But now, Othello says, his father gave it to his mother before she gave it to him, presumably to keep as a sign of fidelity. That is, he gave it for the same purpose. It's a shift from a wife holding the token to keep her husband faithful to a husband giving the handkerchief to his wife, both as a pledge of love and as a test of her, Othello's mother's, fidelity. How are we to explain this variation in how and from whom Othello got the handkerchief from within his own family? Well, is Othello inventing another family history here, or is he just confused? At this point, by the way, when he says that his father gave it to his mother, he makes no reference to the ancient history of fortune tellers or the murky supernatural origins of the napkin. Is he then inventing this, or confused, or what? Well, I think there are three possible ways we can try to interpret the contradiction. First is this. In his emotional agitation, Othello mistakenly conflates his father with himself as the giver of the napkin to his wife, because, after all, he gave it to Desdemona, and Othello sees all men as victimized by their unfaithful wives. Thus, he somehow imagines, even though it wasn't the case in the previous telling, that his father gave it to his mother. Now, in this case, if this is the case, Othello is confused because he has absorbed the past into his own terrible situation and distorted his memory of the past, somehow reading back into the past the idea that his father gave it to his mother because he himself gave it to Desdemona. That would be, a kind of mental confusion. A second possibility is this, that this contradiction in the transmission of the handkerchief within his own family from the earlier account is a deliberate variation. It's as if Othello is now fabricating a family precedent by saying his father gave it to his mother, a family precedent for his own testing of Desdemona, and deliberately inventing the story of the father giving it to the mother to justify punishing his own wife for her failure to be faithful, in some way suggesting that he was following his father's example in using the handkerchief as a kind of test of the wife's fidelity. Finally, a third possibility. The contradiction between this version and the earlier one could indicate that Othello invented the earlier history of the handkerchief, originating with a sibyl and then a fortune teller before it was passed to the mother who gave it to him, that he had invented that sort of pre-family history steeped in magic and the supernatural, primarily just to terrify Desdemona there. It's impossible, I think, to say for sure what is true. But it's only when Emilia tells Othello that Iago got the handkerchief from her after having asked her to steal it many times, only then that what Aristotle would call the moment of tragic recognition finally descends upon Othello, and he lashes out at last at Iago. Emilia says, "She gave it to Cassio?" No, alas, I found it and did give it to my husband. Othello, stunned. "Are there no stones in heaven but what serves for the thunder?" "Precious villain!" The Moor runs at Othello but is disarmed. Iago stabs his wife, Emilia. Emilia, a moment later, says, "Aye, oh, lay me by my mistress' side," and dies. Now, as Emilia's body is laid beside Desdemona's, Othello, in unspeakable despair and guilt, says, "Now, let it all go." He wants to surrender now to death. There is nothing more. He says, "I am not valiant neither, but every puny whisper gets my sword. But why should honor outlive honesty? Let it go." And then a little later he says, "Who can control his fate? 'Tis not so now. Be not afraid, though you do see me weaponed. Here is my journey's end. Yes, I've got a sword, but I'm not going to use it. No, I don't want to live." Othello speaks here of fate, but it's not really fate that has controlled him and destroyed him, as in Greek tragedies. It's not the gods, it's not a family curse. It is rather one individual. It is Iago, who has preyed on Othello's weaknesses. But Othello can't believe that an actual human being, rather than some larger transpersonal force, could possibly function as such a force of necessity that could operate like fate. After all, Iago is a human being. Indeed, he's so convinced that Iago can't just be an ordinary human being, that he must have some sort of supernatural power, that he tries to confirm that Iago is actually a devil with cloven hooves and not a man. When he attacks him, consider what he says as he attacks Iago. "I look down towards his feet, but that's a fable. If that's what best beest a devil, I cannot kill thee." And he wounds him. Yeah, surely you cannot be a human being. No human being could have done this. No human being is this profoundly evil, but I don't see any cloven feet. How can that possibly be? He wounds Iago, tries to kill him, but he doesn't succeed. Iago is wounded, but unlike every other Shakespeare villain, Claudius, for example, Edmund and King Lear, Iago lives. Why does Shakespeare allow him to live? Well, I think he is doing so, perhaps, to suggest that the evil that Iago embodies is, though it may seem so absolute as to be demonic and even supernatural, is actually human, and that the evil that Iago embodies in such a purely distilled way dwells in mankind at large, that it is a part of human nature that cannot be eradicated with the death of a single individual. It's terrifying to think that such evil dwells in mortal man, but Shakespeare seems to insist that we recognize it because that evil is not supernatural. When Othello asks Iago, why have you ensnared my body and soul?" Iago says only, "You know what you know, and I will never speak a word hereafter." Oh my God. Iago's silence after such loquacious lies, his silence now is his final torture of Othello. Having corrupted him with the misuse of language, now we find this appalling act of passive aggression. "I will never explain to you. I will never speak to you. You must live for as long as you do without another word from me." Now, this, of course, could only create confusion and uncertainty in Othello, the very things he can't bear, what he calls chaos. This is Iago's final infliction of pain. He won't even give his victim a cause for destroying his life. But I think we know what it is, because having read Iago's soliloquies, which Othello has not, we know that there were many motives behind his systematic desire to destroy the Moor. Othello, at this point, as I've noted, wishes only to die, but he sees death not as an escape from the psychic and physical pain that he is suffering. Rather, he wants that pain to continue. He wants to be punished with more suffering as a form of atonement because he believes he deserves it. Indeed, he foresees devils pulling him down to hell, and he believes, after what he has done, that he deserves to be there. Now, ironically then, just before taking his own life, Othello seems to re-embrace a Christian worldview, the notion that he will be punished justly for his sins. He re-embraces Christianity, if only to consign himself to the Christian hell as he stares down at the woman, the innocent woman he murdered. He says, "Where should Othello go? Now, how dost thou look now?" he says, addressing the dead Desdemona. "O ill-starred wench, oh, how unfortunate, how unlucky you were, pale as thy smock." Again, the emphasis on her whiteness, which he loves. "When we shall meet at Compt, this look of thine will hurl my soul from heaven, as fiends will snatch it. Cold, cold, my girl, even like thy chastity. O cursed, cursed slave, whip me, ye devils, from the possession of this heavenly sight. Blow me about in the winds, roast me in sulfur, wash me in steep down gulfs of liquid fire. I deserve to burn, because I see what I have done." Now, knowing that in Christian thought, suicide is the one unforgivable sin, the one sin that will undeniably send one's soul to hell, Othello ensures that he will go to hell, where he believes he deserves to go, by killing himself. But his extraordinary final speech, just before he stabs himself to death, indicates that self-inflicted death has another meaning for Othello as well, beyond the fact that it will damn his soul. There is a nobility in it that he wishes to communicate. He says, "I pray you, in your letters, when you shall these unlucky deeds relate, speak of me as I am, nothing extenuate, nor set down aught in malice. Then must you speak of one that loved, not wisely, but too well, of one not easily jealous, but being wrought, perplexed in the extreme, of one whose hand, like the base Judean, threw a pearl away richer than all his tribe, of one whose subdued eyes, albeit unused to the melting mood, drops tears as fast as the Arabian trees their medicinable gum. Set you down this, and say besides that in Aleppo once, where a malignant and a turbaned Turk beat a Venetian and traduced the state, I took by the throat the circumcised dog and smote him thus." He stabs himself, and then, bending to the body of Desdemona, "I kissed thee ere I killed thee, no way but this, killing myself to die," upon a kiss, and kisses her one final time as he dies. Now, note that in this self-inflicted death, we get a farewell address that he wants those who hear it to take back to Venice. And he wants this adopted city of his, the fathers of it, to know two things. First, he wants them to know of his remorse for what he regards as crimes not just against Desdemona, but against white society. And second, he wants them to know how much he loved his victim. He wants the world to understand and remember then both his remorse for his crime and the fact that his love, while misdirected, was genuine. And so he stages this death as a ritual punishment. It is a punishment, effectively, for the emergence of the dark, irrational impulses within him that he associates with his pagan origins as a dark-skinned Moor in North Africa. Othello stabs himself the way he stabbed once a turbaned Turk in Aleppo, a Muslim town in Syria. And in recounting this, recounting it in a way that only at the last moment when he stabs himself, is there any hint that he's about to do that? Otherwise, they might have stopped him. In recounting this, you might note, he is essentially attacking a malignant part of himself that Othello associates with his own non-Christian, non-European past, as if he's killing off the Moor within that he feels is responsible in some ways for allowing Iago to corrupt him. That is, he's attacking the dark-skinned Turk within, the dark-skinned Moor, the black man. And in doing so, Othello reveals again the fierce division within him between reason and unreason, pagan and Christian, civilized and barbarian, that has always raged within him, that he kept subdued and controlled early in the play, but lost control of later. But this final speech is certainly troubling, because Othello is, as I've suggested, implicitly blaming his crimes not just on Iago, but on his race, his origins, on his blackness, traits that he had seemed to be proud of earlier in the play, but which we realized he felt insecure about and that he came to hate later. The racial self-contempt that we find, I think, in this dying passage certainly poses a challenge for a 20th century audience. Well, as Othello dies, he kisses the dead body of Desdemona one last time, affirming his passionate love for the woman that he killed, someone he loved too well in the very intensity of his love, because the very intensity of it, his basing his entire life and self-worth upon it, turned that passionate, all-consuming love into a passionate, all-consuming, jealous hatred. I die upon a kiss, he says. Now, the phrase is rich with implication because of the fact that this woman that he's kissing has been cast herself as a Christ figure. In his speech, Othello refers and compares himself to the base Judean who threw away a pearl worth all his tribe. The base Judean that Othello is referring to is Judas. Judas betrayed Christ for 30 pieces of silver and betrayed him with a kiss, you may remember. Othello, who now kisses Desdemona, associates Desdemona with the betrayed, crucified Christ, as he associates himself with Judas. He sees his wife as a perfect, innocent victim. Like Judas, he also takes his life. Othello knows that in killing Desdemona, he threw away something loving and pure. And in allowing Othello to formulate this view of Desdemona as loving and pure, Shakespeare invokes for the last time the language of gems. He speaks of Desdemona, Othello does here, as a pearl. As he says, a Judean who threw a pearl away richer than all his tribe. Now, the reference in the context of Desdemona's linkage to Christ is to the pearl of great price in Scripture. The pearl of great price is often associated with Christ as a symbol of Christ in its purity, in its goodness, in its rarity. This final image of jewels that link Desdemona again with Christ as an innocent sacrifice culminate a process of, or an evolution of language of jewels and gem and treasure that began when Brabantio first sarcastically invoked the word jewel in Act 1, when he said that she was essentially a valueless jewel. Well, We learn in Act 5 that Brabantio has died, presumably died of grief after spurning, casting off his daughter, just as Othello has spurned and cast off his wife and is now about to die himself. In both cases, the jewel, the gem, the pearl, Desdemona, has been mishandled, has been rejected, cast off, not recognized for its value until it was too late. Because it is only in dying, having stabbed himself, that Othello understands that Desdemona's real value exceeded what he had earlier referred to as the value of a perfect chrysolite. Now it is clear to Othello that his wife was a precious gem herself, and that her true worth all along was not in her physical beauty and her alabaster skin, but rather her true beauty was her unconditional love and her spiritual goodness. And yet we would be remiss not to note that the pearl is also the final image, not just of gems and jewels in the play, but the final image of whiteness. It is the color of her now pale skin, the color of the wedding sheets on which she died. And as such, it is the final iteration of that trope of white versus black that has been in constant tension throughout this play. Othello loved Desdemona's alabaster skin, but he now realizes that her greater value lay inside.